From Minneapolis, Minnesota, welcome to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.
Today, theater begins with community, but first, a membership highlight. We are so excited to announce a new offering to our education season called Writing Workshops. These 10 to 12-week workshops have weekly synchronous sessions in person or virtually via Zoom. These workshops are goal-oriented writing accountability groups focused on revising or generating new drafts of plays with extensive opportunities for sharing and discussing work with the instructor and peers. For more information, check out our classes page on our website. And now, on to the show. Reiko Ho is a director, playwright, and theater maker from Hawaii. She holds a master's degree in theater and dance with a special focus on Asian theater and theater for young audiences. Reiko is an accomplished theater artist whose work has been seen throughout Hawaii and nationally. Her most recent work, The Great Race, The Story of the Chinese Zodiac, which she wrote and directed this spring for Honolulu Theatre for Youth, received a 2024 National Endowment of the Arts grant. The show will complete a statewide tour of Hawaii in the fall. Also, in 2023-24, her play, The Carp Who Would Not Quit, toured to 14 venues across the nation and closed as part of the season at Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis. Reiko loves making theater that gives voice to the diverse communities of her island home. She is currently Artistic Associate for Honolulu Theatre for Youth, a member of the Consortium of Asian American Theaters and Artists, and on the Board of Directors for TYA USA. All right, we are so excited to welcome Reiko Ho. Our first question that we always start with is, how did you get into theater?
Well, I was kind of introverted growing up in Hawaii, and we had limited theater experiences, but I knew I wanted to do theater since I was about in second grade, and then tracked that way through high school. I had a dance scholarship in high school, and then immediately entered theater as my major when I got into college. So I have been a theater person from being a little cakey, a little child.
Oh, I love that. Can you talk about how you knew that telling stories for the stage was going to be how you wanted to continue on in your life? I mean, it must be wild to kind of start so young. Was there a point for you where you were like, yep, I'm just going to keep going with this with intention?
I love stories. I love stories of every kind. When I was little, I loved stories. I still love stories. And I guess I speak as a theater maker of color and a woman. So, when I was in college years ago, there's no content that actually represented myself and people like me on stage. So I ended up creating a lot of content. I think I create a lot of content where there's no content that exists. And I think that's how I kind of came into that and being a maker. Mm-hmm. And I think I was a little mad in college because first of all, when I started as a performer, there's no parts. There was very limited parts for a woman of color to play. And I am Asian, I am Japanese and Chinese, and mixed race. So it was really hard. And I even spent some time in LA, as a young actor, trying to make it there in my 20s. And it was terrible because I was cast either with an accent and had to speak some sort of broken Asian language, maybe not even Japanese or Chinese, or possibly a hooker or some kind of some kind of exotified, fetishized female kind of a character, and I hated it. So, and theater has always been my first love. I love making stories. It's the art of the human heart, right? That we all know. So I love telling stories in real time on stage. So I quickly left that behind and came back to Hawaii and began working more earnestly in theater. And I've always been involved also in theater for young audiences. I love making theater for our youngest audience members.
In your work, you show up in a lot of ways. You're wearing several different hats as a playwright, a director, a performer. How many other hats do you wear? And how do you show up?
Some of my other hats that I wear, again, first, as a theater maker of color, I think we all have had to wear a lot of hats. So I just want to acknowledge that many of us have had to struggle and wear lots of hats. But so my other hats that I love are, I'm a mom, so I wear that
Yes.
hat. I'm a martial artist and a martial arts sensei. I had my own dojo for 15 years prior to the pandemic. And I love that. So I'm a teacher of martial arts. I'm also an administrator for my own theater and the director of marketing at Honolulu Theatre for Youth. So again, it's a small company, and knowing how to wear all of those hats helps the company thrive. So I'm always willing to learn how to do a new skill if it helps my community survive.
You've been at Honolulu Theatre for Youth for many years. Can you talk about that organization? Can you talk about theater for young audiences and your work within it and what you love so much about it?
Yes. HTY, Honolulu Theatre for Youth, is a theater of place. And I love it so very much because we make space for everybody's story to be told. And it reflects the communities that we are in, that the company is made up of. And we tell the stories that are meaningful to our community. And sometimes in that specificity, we feel that maybe we weren't nationally, we weren't for everybody. We weren't for everybody's taste or everybody's community because we are so specific. But what we have learned through the pandemic is that our storytelling is universal. And so our stories reach everyone. And right now we're seeing that a little bit. We're reaching out a little bit more into the world with our projects. And we're seeing how that voice and how we engage in community is effective in all communities. And we're continuing to learn and grow. Also, I feel that young people should be part of every important conversation. And we change the world when we serve our young.
Yes. Oh,
I kind of a follow-up to that question and wondering how you have those conversations with adults and children at the same time and making sure you're meeting everybody where they're at.
I actually think there's not that much of a difference between adults and young children and young people. I think that people might think that. So sometimes we create barriers where there actually are no barriers. And in fact, young people's minds are so much more open most of the time to those kinds of conversations. And they're so resilient. I think we have to give our young people much more credit than sometimes they're given out in the world about what they are willing to watch, what they're willing to see, what they're willing to think about. Because they like the big ideas. We just have to provide opportunities for them to engage in that way.
Yeah.
They also experience the tragedy and the hardship of life often without a lens to kind of see it objectively from, or to know that other people go through those things as well. I feel like a lot of times we're trying to protect our children when in life they're experiencing, so many things and often don't get to talk about it. Can you talk a little bit about how you, I don't know, maybe challenge? I think it's the adults who show up and are like, kids can't handle this. And it's not the kids who can't handle this.
I think the best TYA is when people are just very brave. And I know so many wonderful TYA artists that the stories that they tell, I think it's some of the best theater being made in the universe right now, so and I definitely see that throughout the pandemic, more stories are being told, and there's more demand for different kinds of stories to be told, from Indigenous stories to cultural stories, and I'm really appreciative of that. So I can only speak for myself at HTY, but we don't shy away from that. And I'm very proud to be part of a team that when I go and tell my team and my artistic director, I'm really mad about anti-Asian hate. let's do an episode on our television show. Can we do that in real time when we were responding during the pandemic? And his answer is yes.
Mm.
So we also get the support we need to tell those stories, which I'm always deeply grateful for.
That's a beautiful thing. And what you've just named also, I think, is kind of rare. Not necessarily that you got a yes, but that you are nimble enough to be able to respond immediately as things are happening. I find I hear a lot of artists saying, well, there wasn't enough time to develop that, or we had to go through this whole process, or people had to get on board and they aren't able to respond in the moment. Do you feel like there's something you can point to that makes that possible for you all?
As a organization, I really think it's our artistic director allows us to do that. And sometimes he moves so fast that a lot of us want to slow down a little bit. But he keeps us just moving forward and challenges us in that way to think how we can go forward. And I guess I haven't always had in my own career, I had many no's, and I haven't had opportunities to sit at tables or to have that. So in these last years, especially since the pandemic, in the last 5 years, it's been such a joy because I feel braver. And I'm able to say things like I might not have brought that up before, that I wanted to do something around that. And now I feel much more empowered to do so. And I'm lucky to be on a team that wants that. Our team at H2I, the artistic team, is almost all, I would say 90% BIPOC and 50% Indigenous Hawaiian artists. So we have a very diverse team, which I'm also very lucky, which is also why I love to stay based in Hawaii and not move outside of H2I, because I get to sit at a table with people like me.
So important.
Today, we're talking about how theater makes art with the community, for the community. And community is a funny word because everybody defines it a little bit differently depending on your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes community just means your audience that comes in, or can mean donors. For you and your organization, what does community mean to you?
Community for us is serving our place. And so we're always listening to conversations that are happening. Again, a majority of our artistic team is BIPOC and almost half Native Hawaiian. And so we do have a special focus on trying to bring Indigenous Hawaiian stories to the stage. So every season of ours includes something around that, or one or more things around that. But we're also listening in other ways. So, for example, my last project that premiered in May, The Great Race, the story of the Chinese Zodiac, was again one of my responses to anti-Asian hate, especially against Chinese people during the pandemic. It was important for me that we have a story that delights in Chinese culture and brings joy and shows that. So part of the community at H2I is also the people represented on the artistic team. So I got to tell that story because I'm part of my H2I community, but also to serve our greater Asian community at large. And we have a large Asian community in Hawaii.
Why do you feel like community is important to you individually, and how do you feel like it is important to your organization?
I think telling our own stories is the most important thing we do as theater makers, and finding that authentic voice is what drives all of us to make theater. And even when you make theater that is not your own story, you're always trying to have your own voice in that theater. Project. So I think we get to create those stories very specifically and lean into our own voices. And that's important for me personally, as well as I think all of us at H2I. So my own personal values align with the company's values, which is also very important.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of representation on stage, what are the ways that you serve your community and allow them to impact the stories that you're telling in your theater and in that theatrical space?
That's a wide open question, but I think um, I think engaging in community happens in different ways. So again, I'll just use one of my projects as an example. I think I always want to have different diverse people on my own teams. So I look to see who's filling the seats at tables on teams of productions that I'm running, but also we make a practice of using cultural and master practitioners as experts or consultants or designers for all of our projects at H2I. And I love that. So for the Great Race, I used Kung Fu and lion dance practitioners from our community to enrich the experience of our artists on stage, but also enrich the experience of the audience, right? And show them these works that are outside of the boundaries of theater. And a lot of indigenous practice happens outside of the sort of boundaries of white theater, right? The construct of white theater. So we always use cultural practitioners. One of our shows that is touring nationally, the Pa'akai We Bring, is a Hawaiian show around the practice of salt. And we visited the salt farms on Kauai and those families to create that story. And we brought in Hanale Marzan, who is a artist, indigenous Hawaiian artist, fabric artist, to create the set elements for that show. So we're trying to engage all these different artists in all these different ways in every production. And then we're also listening to the community at large because, for example, one of the latest immigrant groups in Hawaii are the Micronesians. And they get bullied a lot in schools. So this past season, we produced a show with Teata Theater, and it was about a Micronesian experience in Hawaii. And it was the best part of that show was sitting in the audience and hearing some of the Micronesian kids see themselves on stage and have that spark of recognition and pride.
That's amazing. That's really moving. We have a lot of people who talk about wanting to work with the community. I mean, I think this is common. We want to work with our community. We want to create something for the community, or with the community. And I know that can be a great effort, and sometimes that can be a harmful effort. And there are things that people can do that can make that really successful, and other things that might make it, harmful even.
Right.
Do you have advice for working with community? And what are some practices that you all use? You talked about using cultural practitioners. Other things that you would offer as advice to folks who think they want to work in their own communities?
Gosh, orienting and grappling, especially around any kind of racial or cultural, telling those kinds of stories, is hard. It is very hard. And we are constantly learning and trying to be better all the time about how we engage in community. And I think it starts with listening, but first you must grapple inside yourself. And you must orient yourself with where you are at with your own cultural practice and your own race and all of those things if you want to tell those kinds of stories so that they're not harmful, and then you have to be in a space of listening and reflecting constantly and reflecting with your team as well. And that's, I guess, that has to be a practice that is, you have to actually embody that practice in order to make those kinds of stories and not harm other people. Now, there's no safe space for every person, so we acknowledge that when we tell these stories as well, and hope that in the end that story needed to be told. That's why we told it, but it's not safe for everybody, and acknowledging that.
That's huge. I think there's a lot of discomfort that people experience that causes them to say, this this isn't okay, rather than knowing that it is okay to sit in uncomfortable spaces and go on the journey and be self-reflective. And so I love that you're talking about that there's no safe place for every person. That's really powerful.
And it's scary too. It is scary. Like we do a lot of discussion around that, because you don't want to offend people, but then you need to say the thing. So let's just say the thing. And then how do we deal with if we offend or trigger somebody in a harmful way? Like how do we also deal with that? How do we talk about it? So I think expanding the practice around pre and post engagement is also really important when you're telling cultural stories. You can't just sort of have the musical go on and then clap at the end and let it go. And also those practices for our people that are involved. I myself have really tried to. Sometimes you have to be able to have the post experience also with your cast or with your crew, your production team, because that story was hard to tell, right? And everyone needs a way to decompress or reassess, right, after that story is told and figure out where they are at that point.
That's a really good piece of advice for doing community work, also for audiences as community and also for artists as community.
Yeah. A thing that you hit on is that there's a lot of emotional labor that's involved in that. And we don't always, in these positions, account for that when it comes to thinking about capacity. And I just wonder how you guys also factor that in for yourselves, knowing that you're holding yourselves accountable. You're also holding an accountable space because you know that you can't necessarily make it safe for everyone to necessarily feel brave or to step out or to show themselves. And you're holding that weight for you as a staff, you as artists, your community, your audience. And that's just a heavy balancing act. And I commend you for it. And also, I'm just wondering, how do you how do you work that out for yourself?
Well, admittedly, I'm tired at the end of this season. It's been a wonderful 2 years, really. I've done so many just really beautiful projects, including working with the University of Hawaii's graduate students on a project about being Asian in America right now. And it was all women. It was so fabulous. And I created a piece with them, but exhausting, right? Because you walk out and you're exhausted. And so I guess finding ways for self-care that maybe weren't necessary before are very, very important. And I'm not always the best at that. So I try to get better, but it also feeds me that these stories are getting to be told. And I've been working for so many decades to try to get all of these stories told. So that just fuels me. So when I get really tired, I think about that. And then I'm able to take another step and go to another rehearsal and take on another project.
We have talked about, holding ourselves accountable and working with community. I also want to say that when we have a theater or when we have an arts organization, we're also, we have resources. How are you all responsible stewards of the resources that you have and share with your communities? And what are best practices or recommendations you have for folks to share and also kind of hold the folks accountable who are engaging with those resources and in those spaces with you?
I guess we have a trust that when you enter our space, you're going to engage in that way. And I mean, I have best practices like in rehearsal agreements for my own teams when we are running. And why I say we trust that when you enter the space into this project with us, you understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and you are on the same page with us. And generally the people who are not on the same page with us, they don't do the project with us. So they end up not entering into the space. So we're lucky in that way, but we're also very generous with sharing. And I don't think it's, I don't think it's just being TYA. I think HTY is always very generous about sharing resources, sharing out everything from contacts, bringing in as many cultural practitioners as we possibly can. We maintain an artistic team, an artistic ensemble of local artists. So we try to grow artists from the inside. We also have a full education department that has teaching artists. So we provide education statewide. So we're always generously trying to share that out as much as possible, and be as accessible as possible. And part of us doing the television show during the pandemic was about accessibility. How do we still get into everyone's homes? And we had sponsors and community partners that transferred all of our grants and allowed us to actually do that in that time when we were dark.
That's incredible. I think ultimately it can be really, I think, a very delicate thing to work with community, depending on, especially if you're working with community to create things. People who maybe are coming from outside of the theater field, maybe whose stories we're telling that aren't our own. And so how are we being responsible stewards?
Yeah, we just worked with Teata Productions, as I mentioned, on the show for Micronesia, and I just love watching their community practice as well. So we learn from people who we're working with as well, because that was a really, I think they even call it, community-based theater is their kind of theater that they're making. They're devising it with the community, so they're actually actively seeking stories from their Micronesian community, and then developing those stories, those actual stories, and then putting them on stage in a show. But I love that they actually, and we practice that as well, but we also support theater companies that are in practice around using community and creating stories for and about their community.
That's really cool. So you're not just producing your own work, you're also bringing in work and doing co-productions or hosting.
And that doesn't always happen, because we often just are making shows with our own community and in-house. But yes, so we sometimes work with outside theater companies and produce and help them bring their show to fruition.
That's great.
Oh, that's awesome. There's just a lot of resources that you provide, especially under the umbrella of education, and how you're bringing people in and also using theater to teach more social skills than than teaching like these are your timetables. You're teaching people social skills and also how to apply it to their community so they themselves can be leaders and stewards of their community.
I love that word that you just said, steward, because in Hawaii and at H2A, we really try to embody Hawaiian values. And some of the values include taking care of each other, taking care of our place, and taking care of our community. And we all have a kuleana, a responsibility to our community. And so we try to embody these values as part of our mission at H2Y, and living pono, which is like doing the right thing at the right time. It's a very loose translation, so forgive me, my Hawaiian friends. But and then we try to we also love the wisdom of our ancestors, and this is for me both as an Asian and as a local in Hawaii, and my Kanaka Maoli colleagues feel the same way. We look to the wisdom of our ancestors often to tell our stories as well.
I think the rest of the country could really benefit from adopting some of these values.
I think so too. I think Hawaii is a very unique place, and there's lots of struggles around race and colonialism here. As you might know, American businessmen basically took over Hawaii, and capitalism took over. And I am fourth generation born and raised in Hawaii, and my Japanese and Chinese great grandparents were brought over as workers for plantations by the American businessmen, that run by American businessmen. So we were part of colonialism and manifest destiny and taking over the world. My people being here. So my ancestors are also visitors here, even though I call Hawaii home. So there's a lot of thought around that too, around belonging and what that means, but what being a visitor means, and then honoring our host culture and supporting and being an ally to that as much as I possibly can, always, because so Hawaii is very, very, it's a very interesting microcosm to grow up in.
And hard all at the same time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like that you bring that up of visitors can still be a part of your community, how we identify the community as home, how we see community as family and our responsibility to them. So it is, again, interesting how people identify what community is. Is it native inhabitants and like that culture? Is it those who have blended into the culture? And then you also have to deal with their people in the community that you don't like. What do you do with this? How do you rectify that? How do you put that in conversation and realize that that is a part of your community? And it's just something that's very difficult and hard to grapple with. And I think once you acknowledge it, then there's ways to progress and move forward. Yeah, I just haven't really thought of community in that same way of all those fractures. We break them up, but it's still one thing, if that makes sense.
It is. And I feel like I kind of live in the space between all these things. And that's why I make theater, because in the end, our stories connect us all. And that's why we make our art.
One question that we've started to ask is, and I really love this question, along with obviously our where does theater begin for you question. Do you have any shout outs or art crushes that you would like to share?
And can we also invite you to talk about what you shared with us at the top of this, which is around what's happening in your community with this app?
Well, so I have my most recent sort of inspirational art experience was at the Kata Confest, the National Asian American Theater Conference. Was held in Hawaii this past spring, and I got to see For the Love of Spam.
Which apparently originated in Minnesota, Spam.
Yeah, right. And it is by Breaking Waves Theater, and they're rooted in Guam. And it's a one-woman show, and it was just brilliant because it was about how colonialism related to a can of Spam and her eating of the Spam throughout the different times in her life with different people, and when she moved to the continent and then to London. And it was just very interesting. She had colonialism with the metaphor of a can of Spam, and it was brilliant and funny. And I loved it. And so I was very inspired by them, because that was just such a great example of telling a story that is just really your own, but then also becomes so universal about something that is so important, in many island nations that have been colonized by others. Okay, and then I also am super excited about this coming year for Honolulu Theatre for Youth, because it is our 70th birthday, 70 years of making theater for young people in Hawaii and beyond. So we are producing a season of 9 original shows.
That's amazing. That's huge. 9 original shows is also 9 shows in a season. That's huge.
Yeah, first 9 shows in a season. There are 9 original shows. Some of them have already been created. Like we are bringing back The Great Race to complete a statewide tour, Neighbor Island tour for Hawaii's children. And then, but 5 are world premieres. of
Wow.
brand new works that are coming up for us. And then one of the ongoing projects that we have is that we've recently created an app with Unity, who created Pokemon Go, around visiting historical monuments in Hawaii. So we created a kind of a theatrical AR experience around the statue of King Kamehameha and a statue of Queen Liliuokalani, who was our last queen. And we are in a historic area at H2I, and so you can walk from H2I to these two different statues. And the app creates a experience of engaging with a historic monument in a different way. So there's these characters that pop up and talk to you about what they're doing and why they're looking at this statue with you. And there's ways for you to be a part of that experience. So you can go online to H2I, www.h2iweb.org, and check out Ki'i Aloa'a and download our app on the App Store or on Google.
I love it.
Yeah.
And because you just sort of like glided past it really slickly, I would love to hear you talk about The Great Race, the story of the Chinese zodiac, which you wrote and which is now going to have a life on stage there, but also how can people access this play, and what if they wanted to bring it to their theater or school?
The Great Race, the story of the Chinese zodiac, is my latest work. I wrote it and I directed it. It was commissioned by H2I, but it's also my love letter to my Chinese grandparents. It centers around a Chinese family celebration of New Year's, and they start by making dumplings. And then in that celebration, they retell the very beloved fable of the origin of the zodiac and how the animals got onto the zodiac, and it becomes a family telling the story together experience. And they're using all the found objects that they have on stage to create the story from it. And I love that I got to tell this story that is really about my love of being Chinese, but also again as a response to my anti-Asian hate of Chinese peoples during the pandemic. I wanted to create something that was just joyous and celebratory and fun, and that would make every child laugh and want to go home and eat dumplings. That was the purpose.
I love it. Love it.
Yes, and the project was a 2024 recipient of the grant from the National Endowment of Arts. So we were very proud of that at H2I. And we hope that it will live on, and we hope that it gets to visit the continent. Our agents, Holden Arts, will begin putting that out to people for next season, not this coming season, but the following.
I'm excited. I hope I get to see it somewhere soon.
I hope you do too.
Well, we have hit that time where we must ask our final question, which is, where does theater begin for you?
May I say two things?
Yes.
Is
You
that
can
okay?
as many things as you want.
So first, theater begins when we make space for everyone's story to be told.
Mm.
And then for me, theater begins with the laugh of a child.
I'm just thinking now about different laughs of children I've heard in my life, those big belly laughs from like babies and kids, just total joy. It's a great.
Or the little giggles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my favorite, when it's like the little bubbly giggles that they can't help, and then
Yeah.
it just starts because they have seen something that they recognize or feel or take delight in.
Yeah. Watching kids watch theater or anything really that they find funny, but especially I'm thinking about theater because they've been told to be good, whatever that means, but probably it means be quiet and just don't mess with your friend. And so when those kinds of burbles of laughter pop up out of them, it's because they can't help it, as you're saying. And I just love, I love that.
Yes.
Aw.
I love the good mix sound of like, ooh, when kids notice something that the other characters don't on stage. So it's their response to suspense, and some like even verbalizing, like yelling, "No, look behind you," or anything like that.
And then one of my other favorite things is watching adults watch my TYA productions, because I also direct out in the world for adult theater. But when they laugh like kids, that's one of my other favorite things too.
Oh, yes. Yes. The child within. We need to access that child more often, pretty daily, I think would be better for all of us. Well, I love what you said about theater being the art of the human heart. And I think I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time. And so I think that then theater begins when you're tapping into the real desires or longings or pain or joy of the human heart.
That was one of the ones I wrote down, Hannah. To pick something different.
Alayna and I hang out so often. We have a kind of like a shared beating heart between us, I think. A mind meld.
I love that you heard that. That's so important to me. Like when I make my art, it's always about that. It's always about reaching people's hearts. And I always tell my actors that they're athletes of the human heart. So, you can have athletes of other kinds, but when they're building up their stamina for a show, that what they're doing is they are athletes of the human heart and what that means to be human. So that's what we work on in rehearsal.
What a profound muscle that would be and is, I'm sure, to build.
Well, since Hannah took mine, I'm gonna switch it. For me, theater begins when you get mad, when you either don't see yourself on stage or just see misrepresentations of different versions of your identity. So get mad and change something.
Yeah.
That resonates so deeply with me. I'm snapping my fingers for you right now. Yes. And so many times I have made theater from that space, and from that point of mad, it can become an inspiration for something very positive, like The Great Race.
Yeah, and in a way, it sort of ties this conversation together, because you told us about why you decided to kind of like really lean into storytelling, because your stories weren't being told and you hated the roles you were being offered, and then The Great Race in response to the Asian hate. And like, I love how this sort of bookends our conversation. That theater has begun there for you many times. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so beautiful.
Oh, mahalo. It was so wonderful to be in conversation with both of you. How fun and how amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, I want to come out to Hawaii and see all of your shows.
Well, now I want to come to the dojo with you. Like, that's actually what I really want to do.
Alayna, like, train me.
Join us for our next episode on August 28th. Let us know on Spotify where theater begins for you, and feel free to send your questions for future episodes to the link in the bio.
Thanks for listening to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.